The constant warnings of Judge Lina Hidalgo come crashing home. Fueled by impatience and complacency, COVID-19 infections surge here and across the Lone Star State. As the governor pauses reopening, what next on the uncertain path forward? In the nation's capital, the quest for police reform and racial justice already locked in partisan stalemate. Could it be definitive change must come at the local level? And in the coming battle for the White House, the speculation builds. Which woman will get the bid to be Joe Biden's running mate? Good morning, I'm Greg Groogan, and welcome to What's Your Point, where our panelists call it like they see it. Let's greet them. First up, conservative attorney Michele Maples. Next, businessman and columnist Bill King. In the 3 spot, Charles Blain, the founder of Urban Reform. Batting cleanup, writer, educator, and host of Latino Politics and News, Antonio Diaz. And finally, Fox 26 legal analyst and Houston attorney, Carmen Roe. Let's begin. Backfire. The Texas charge to reopen its economy sooner rather than later has backfired badly, with an exponential rise in COVID-19 infections and hospitalizations. The sustained spike has pushed hospitals across the state to the brink of normal capacity and forced our state's governor to reel back reopening. I'll call it like I see it. With job preservation and rapid economic rebound his priority, Governor Greg Abbott rolled the dice and was wrong. Harris County Judge Lina Hidalgo, unfairly mocked as Chicken Little in this crisis, has been proven right. Given the state's green light to partially unshelter, Texans simply did not have the collective discipline to proceed with caution, and given the opening, the virus is exacting a price. Just how steep a cost remains to be seen, but clearly the course forward in the Lone Star State has been altered, and one hopes a hard lesson learned. With that, we begin our conversation, and I want to go to you, Bill King. These new numbers, they have caused lots of alarm.
Yeah, I don't agree, Greg, that this is necessarily tied to the reopening, because California, which hasn't reopened, is also having the same sort of increase in cases. Look, we don't know why this disease spreads like it does. I've got 3 married couples, friends of mine. One spouse got it, the other one didn't get it. You know, there's so much about this we don't know. But let me give you a couple statistics I think people need to keep in mind. I think the ICU capacity is a concern, but right now, 0.5% of people in Harris County have been diagnosed with this disease. 99.5% of the people, 6 months into this, have not gotten the disease. Fatalities, Texas is 41. 98% of the people that are getting this are surviving. Even people that are in their 80s are surviving at 93, 94%. You know, this is a problem, but it's not the apocalypse that everybody's trying to suggest that it is.
Okay, Tony Diaz, Lina Hidalgo has been sounding the alarm for weeks. She was mocked. Now she's looking pretty good in terms of those warnings.
Well, and I think Judge Hidalgo handled it graciously. She could have had a "I told you so" press conference. She didn't. But at the same time, had we followed her advice earlier on, we wouldn't have to go back and do a shutdown again. Additionally, to me, it's very eye-opening that we're bickering. We've got too many individual plans. This is a lack of leadership at the state level and at the federal level. And there's real cases of people getting sick additionally. We should have more testing. I've been working with some community groups to get some more testing open. That hasn't worked quite as well. So it's about time we take this serious and take all precautions. I want to thank Judge Hidalgo for her leadership.
Okay, I've got to also note that Mayor Sylvester Turner has also been sounding the alarm. Charles Blain, do you think people are going to be more serious about the calls for precautions?
I mean, I think they're going to be more serious when our officials start to get on the same message. That's been the problem. And I think if you look at the state and the national level, the millennials are starting to get the bulk of the blame for this in a really weird way. And I guess it's because we don't vote, so they're less concerned about offending us. But the fact is that the reason that the collective discipline disappeared is because there's mixed messaging. You know, our elected officials are telling us one thing, to wear masks when they don't often do it themselves. They're telling us not to crowd in places, but yet they're holding press conferences together. Monday, we get a notice from the Texas Medical Center saying, you know, we're on the brink of disaster. Then Tuesday, 4 come out and say it's not that bad. They open bars and tell us don't go to bars. I mean, we just keep getting this. Even yesterday, when the county issued a alert to our cellular phone saying that it was bad, then the lieutenant governor issued a tweet saying that it was an overreaction. But that was hours after the governor just re-shut down the bars. So I mean, the messaging is so bad that that's understandable why people just have tuned it out. And so until that gets right, I don't know how we're going to get this together.
Michele Maples, you are responsible for not just one, but 2 lives right now. What is your take on this local development?
It's all about personal responsibility, Greg. I mean, we've got to, let's look back a couple months ago when we heard Dr. Fauci talking about a second wave. And then, of course, we heard Governor Abbott when he was discussing the phases of reopening Texas. He talked about there will be an uptick. Well, guess what, guys? It's happening. I'm surprised everybody else is surprised. Of course it's going to happen when we're finally let out of our cages and we're able to go eat at restaurants in our neighborhoods again. And what I want to point out is that the leaders in the Texas Medical Center, the CEO of St. Luke's Hospital came out and said, at this time last year, on June 25th of 2019, the ICU capacity was at 95%. It's at 100% now. So the ICUs are not overrun. They're at normal capacity. And then the CEO of Memorial Hermann came out and also said that this pandemic is not eclipsing their capabilities. And so I think the fear mongering and the trying to freak everybody out is just, it's overblown. Our hospitals are not at overcapacity. And again, we've got to take personal responsibility. Okay,
Carmen Roe, there still is uncertainty out there. I mean, we've seen this spike. Will it get worse? I mean, and just that possibility has got to get people's attention.
Well, there's no question we have everyone's attention. The problem is, I don't think it's true that Lina Hidalgo's right now or that Chicken Little isn't a thing. I mean, the truth is, if we'd followed her advice, we would be closed for 4 months. And that is untenable. It was then, it is now. And so what we're really saying is that now we're doing testing and now we're getting a good idea of what's going on. But I agree with everything Bill King said. We don't know. And that's what we know for certainty. But we also know that scare tactics and shutting down a city like Houston will never be the answer. And so if that's what Lina Hidalgo is advocating for, which is what I hear, I don't think that's ever going to be a tenable situation. At the end of the day, what we need to do is get good information so that we can make choices and live our lives and make decisions about how to keep our businesses going so we can go out and be as safe as possible. And that's what Lina Hidalgo could do as a leader in our community.
Okay, we're going to leave it there. Stick around, everyone. We're diving deeper into the political cost of this COVID resurgence. Will the haste to reopen hurt Republicans with Texas voters? Plus, the red-hot race to challenge Senator John Cornyn in November. We talked to both Democratic finalists one-on-one. Welcome back. It is the age-old rule of political leadership. When things go right, you get the credit. But when you make a call that goes south, the blame falls squarely on your shoulders. Thus, this COVID resurgence has Democrats hammering the leadership of President Trump, Governor Abbott, and locally State Senator Betancourt and others. Panel, is it justified or just politics? Tony Diaz, going straight to you.
I think it's justified that we blame the leaders in charge, especially Republicans who did such irresponsible things, such as they condone the Dallas nail salon owner who basically flaunted breaking the law. And in fact, Dan Patrick said he would pay for her fines. He would serve her time in jail. That really was careless and discriminatory too, because at the same time, there were Latina salon owners in Laredo who suffered the maximum consequences. So it's about time that we set this straight, and their mistakes are costing lives and jobs.
Okay, Charles Blain, Republicans took a beating this week. Will it last?
I think it's going to last if some changes aren't made soon. I mean, 3 weeks from this weekend is the Republican Party of Texas convention, and they coin it as the largest political gathering in the free world. They're going to have 10,000 people packed into the George R. Brown, but you're telling me that bar owners can't open and make money, that bartenders can't make money, that waitress and waiters can't make money, that I can't go sit outside of the patio at Kirby Ice House and have a drink, but you're going to pack these people into a place like that? So yeah, if the hypocrisy continues, it's going to be a problem, and I think Texans are going to realize that.
Pile in here, Bill King.
You know, I took a trip to Brownsville here over the last couple of weeks, and I can tell you, once you get outside the bubble of these metropolitan areas, you wouldn't know this is going on. You know, people are not social distancing; they're not wearing masks. When you get out in the rural and even in the suburban areas, the infection rates are so low in those areas. It's just not affecting them like it is those of us that live right here in the middle of town. And I think we're living in a bubble on this. I don't think it's going to have the political impact people think it's going to have.
Michele Maples, are Republicans in trouble?
You know, I think Republicans are being quite hypocritical, but however, so are the Democrats. I mean, 3 weeks ago, when we packed 60,000 people outside of City Hall, we weren't concerned about coronavirus. I thought coronavirus was gone because I didn't hear about it on any of the major news channels. Oh, and again, it wasn't a problem for an indoor memorial service that brought in 6,000 people indoors. That wasn't a super spreader either. And so blaming millennials for going to bars is just not giving the full picture, and both sides are guilty of being hypocrites on this, which makes us not believe anything anybody says ever.
Carmen Roe, final word goes to you, about 40 seconds.
Okay. I mean, I think this is just politics, and it's sad, not surprising, but sad that politics and COVID-19 have gotten so enmeshed that nobody knows one thing from another. What we know for certainty is that we don't know. We don't know so much that we can't make decisions. But we also now know that Governor Abbott, who said he wouldn't shut down again, has done just that. And then inexplicably and absurdly, he says you can't go to bars or tubing events. I don't know how tubing events and bars have gotten on his bad list, but they are. So playgrounds, ice cream parlors, and other things are good, but tubing and bars are bad. So I mean, at the end of the day, you can't trust anything that's going on, which goes back to we need the good information so we can make choices for ourselves at this point.
Going to leave it there. Still ahead, with the pandemic still raging and down double digits in the polls, President Trump responds by throwing campaign rallies. Our panel tackles the ramifications after this short break. Welcome back. It was the great Union Naval Commander David Farragut who famously announced during the Battle of Mobile Bay, "Damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead." It appears Donald J. Trump has adopted the same tactic 5 months and change from Election Day. After his much ballyhooed Tulsa rally failed to fill even half the arena, the clearly disappointed president pushed on, packing a much smaller Arizona church this week with young people, most of whom were not wearing protective masks. Mind you, this was all happening in two cities where COVID cases were on a sharp and alarming uptick. And then in Wisconsin, Mr. Trump doubled down on a previous controversial suggestion that he would slow down testing to slow down reported infections, saying if we didn't do testing, we would have no cases. The president has since walked back that statement, claiming he was being sarcastic. Panel, what do you make of this? I'm going to start with Carmen Roe.
You know, it's interesting. I mean, honestly, the resurgence is something that I don't think anybody could really see happening the way that it did. So unfortunately, Trump I think he got caught off guard. But I do think it's important to note that I think he should be and has been diagnosed by the popular opinion with consistent, unfiltered, spontaneous statement-itis. I would like to note for the record that there is no cure. But I do think that, for the record, he's correct that if we do not continue to test people, we will not have an uptick in these numbers.
Okay, Michele Maples, the president has a big decision to make. Look, those rallies are great with his base. They were a big reason he got elected in 2016. Does he continue with the big rallies?
I think he needs to, because that's where Trump shines and his supporters love it. And that's how he galvanizes his base. He doesn't have the luxury of sitting in a basement like Joe Biden does at this point in time. But what's very, very interesting is how critical we are of gatherings of Republicans at a rally for Trump, and we were so critical of those protests in Michigan happening when they were demanding that the state reopen. However, we're not hearing that same criticism with the protests and the looting and the riots that happened in our major cities all over the United States. So why is one being treated differently than the other? Because I really don't get it. I would like somebody to explain to me why one protest is okay, but the other protest is not okay, and why one rally is okay and another one isn't.
Okay, Tony Diaz, we all know that those voters in the messy middle, the independents, decide who's going to be in the White House. If Trump continues to have major rallies, do you think that bodes well for him with those voters saying, what are you doing? We're in a pandemic.
Well, folks are still making up their minds. They can actually see that Donald Trump is trying to win this election with reruns from 2016, but everybody knows the ending. And in fact, what a powerful metaphor. His rally in Tulsa was a big flop, and all you can see is a sea of blue, empty seats. It's also revealing that he can't adapt. He can't be clever enough to evolve with change. So, for example, he lied and said that he never had an empty seat. Reminds people that he lied about the size of his inauguration turnout. I think what's happening now is we're seeing through him, and really you have to deliver. You can't just say build a wall. Mexico didn't pay for it. Someone's got to pay for it. We're all paying for his mismanagement of America. I think people are waking up.
Okay, I go now to the paragon of pragmatism, Bill King. You think Donald Trump continues with these rallies, or is that a huge mistake?
You know, it's interesting to me. Trump is, he has this incredible intuitive ability to sense where the country is and where people are. And he picked up on some stuff in 2016 that I think most of us missed. But he seems to have gone tone deaf lately. The country's not in the mood for this bellicose, you know, damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead, to use your analogy, right? And the polling is showing it. And he's not only losing independent, he's also losing Republican suburban women. And I'm just telling you, if he loses them, he is toast. And I've talked to him, and it's not that they disagree with his policy so much and they don't buy into some of the leftist accusation stuff. They're just tired of the tone. They don't want their kids hearing it. They're tired of it, and they're ready for some kind of normalcy. I think he's in real trouble.
Okay, Charles Blain, I know you talk to a lot of Republicans. Undercurrent, what is the conversation right now, 5 months out from the election?
Yeah, I mean, I think the folks who have been on Team Trump and you know, red team are still going to be on that team, but I do think it is that messy middle, as you say, that's going to kind of waver a little bit. And you know, to criticize him for having the rallies, I think, listen, if he wants to have the rallies, he has the right to do so, and you have the right to not go. I won't be going to any right now. I'll be staying away. But I think the issue goes back to this messaging issue where they tell us one thing and do another. They say, listen to local officials. Local officials say don't have a rally. They have a rally. They say wear masks at the coronavirus task force press conference. They're not wearing masks at the coronavirus press conference. So I think they need to clean that up. They need to get the messaging right, and I think things can start to look better. But until then, we're stuck here.
Okay, we're going to leave it there. Still ahead is more coronavirus cash heading to American households. A president seeking re-election says he supports another round of checks. The potential fallout is on our table after the break. Welcome back. This week, the president signaled his willingness to support a second round of stimulus checks to millions of Americans. The money this time is likely to be focused on those who have lost their jobs and those who are low income. Republican critics have said adding to the growing flood of red ink is a bad move. However, timing is critical, would see the payments delivered in the weeks leading up to the election. Panel, what's your point? I'm starting with you, Michele Maples.
Waiting until the weeks before the election would not be the right move. I mean, we just closed bars on Friday in Texas. Those bar owners, those individuals who work in bars, they need support, and they need it now. And so if we're going to do another round of stimulus checks, let's get them to those people who have lost their jobs. Let's not do a blanket sending of checks to people like me who have not lost my job. I don't need a stimulus check. Those individuals whose businesses are not allowed to be reopened and their employees, they need help, and they need it now.
Charles Blain, you've been a budget hawk. Can you justify spending Billions, if not trillions more.
No, and especially if they don't do it in a more surgical approach than they did last time. I mean, listen, a lot of these people are out of jobs because of government. Government shut them down, so government should make them whole. But when they did this blanket kind of release of checks last time, like Michele said, folks like us on this panel who were still employed or didn't necessarily need a check, got a check, which meant that folks who were underemployed, unemployed, furloughed, laid off, whatever the case was, could have gotten more money to carry them over these few months, but didn't because we did these blanket $1,200 checks. And so if they're going to do it that same way, then I don't think it's a good way of going about it. And they certainly shouldn't be sending billions of people like they did last time.
Okay, Tony Diaz, Democrats are sort of in a tough place here. The president can approve these stimulus checks and get some political benefit. Democrats could probably block that, but they're the party of the masses. They want to get money to people. So what happens?
Well, the sentiment's on point. I think we should help Americans right now, but we've got 2 or 3 rent checks due between now and November. Additionally, the Trump administration has mismanaged this in so many different ways, including mailing over $1 billion to folks who are deceased. So it really undermines any smart move. And again, we've got the whole specter of the Bolton book coming out that implies that everything Donald Trump does is for re-election, and to give money out right before you're asking for a vote smacks of all of that. So Trump has mismanaged this as well. America needs to be saved. He's the wrong guy to do that.
Bill, 30 seconds, save time for Carmen.
Look, one thing that there's bipartisan support on in Washington, D.C. right now is giving away money and going into debt. What everybody needs to understand, this money doesn't appear magically. When you take that money, you are taking it from your children and grandchildren. Those are the folks who will end up paying this money back someday. So you need to think about, am I comfortable doing that?
Carmen, 30 seconds.
So, more stimulus checks right now wouldn't be the right move, in my opinion. I still think that, as Michele said, we closed bars and tubing on Friday. Things are changing day by day. We're back to that. So we need to be careful about when we release this money. But I think it's also important, whether he can or can't is not the question. Whether he should or should not is the issue. And I think it reeks of buying votes. I also thought that, eating hamburgers on Air Force One with his hat was not a good thing, but it turned out to be a great thing for, average Americans who voted for him. So who knows?
We're going to leave it there. Still ahead, the thunderous demand for racial justice and police reform runs smack into a partisan roadblock. We tackle the latest from the nation's capital and Houston City Hall after the break. Welcome back. As extraordinary the moment, as deep the popular consensus, is anyone really surprised that the first rapid movements toward meaningful change have collided in the nation's capital and ground to the full halt we know as partisan gridlock? The Republican Senate bill known as the Justice Act derailed by Democrats who view it as a woefully inadequate response to systemic racial injustice. On the flip side, the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, passed in the democratically controlled House, appears doomed, with Senate Republicans dead set against provisions making it much easier to sue individual police officers for damages. Meantime, here at home, at a hearing of Houston City Council's Public Safety Committee, scores of citizens angrily demanded not just the defunding, but further the complete abolition of HPD. Here's a small sample.
The police system is racist. It needs to be abolished. The Black and Latinx communities of Houston do not trust the Houston Police Department at all.
And what we're finding is that many of our state and local leaders are bought and paid for by the police union. Many of you have taken their money. So we have to ask the question, who do you all really represent?
Okay, panel, whether local or national, what do you see happening on police reform in the days and months to come? And I'm going to start with our criminal lawyer, Carmen Roe.
Thank you, Greg. So I think it's a wash on the national level. Look, if we don't get bipartisan participation from people who are knowledgeable and stakeholders in this, we are never going to see real change. And that's what we have now is nothing. So I think it's a total wash. As far as the local level, I don't understand defunding police departments, people. What we really need is training education, and more training. Everyone has been saying for years, decades probably, back in the 60s, that training is what we're missing, and training takes funding. So not only should we not be defunding our police department, we need to support them, we need to embrace them, we need to get them educated, and we need to get them trained because they carry deadly weapons on their hip.
Charles Blain, I've been waiting all week to get your take on this.
Yeah, so the mayor created a police commission, police task force commission this week, and it's filled with friends and contractors and contributors. And so I don't think anything's going to come of that. I think we're going to see the same thing that happened with his transition team happen with this, which is nothing. And for the Justice Act and the federal government, I was a little frustrated. I'm a huge fan of Tim Scott, but seeing what was coming out of this didn't really excite me. I mean, what it did was it endorsed qualified immunity. It even expanded it for most officials, even like prison guards. It expanded kind of the scope of the intent of Congress's Civil Rights Act of 1871, saying that they could be immunized for abuse of rights. And it expanded the funding to police and prosecutors, which could go against local reforms to change the role of policing. If Congress really wants to address criminal justice reform, they need to look at ending qualified immunity, ending no-knock raids, ending civil asset forfeiture, things like that, ending the overcriminalization of police, and just ending overcriminalization and the militarization of police, and just allowing policing to happen on the local level. But right now, that's not where we are, and we need a lot. We have a lot of area to grow there. So I hope we see some resolution soon.
Tony Diaz, help me out, buddy, because I do not see how our society doesn't break down in anarchy if we abolish HPD. And that request was made over and over and over again. Help me out.
Sure, the phrase defund the police is meant to catch attention, just like kneeling at a football game to the national anthem was supposed to capture attention. People aren't listening. And if you want to know what it really means, this profound change, just look to Minneapolis. City Council, if you want the headline, voted to defund the police. That will be on the ballot for people to vote on in November. But if you talk to the politicians one-on-one, they tell you what that means. They want a profound analysis of how to work with people, not how to criminalize people, and how to build the community up. We're going to see what that means in Minneapolis. New York moved fast too. They actually got rid of chokeholds right away. So people are tired of the same old, same old. If you're not listening, then you're not acting. Last thing I'll say is that Republican bill at the national level, they should call that the All Lives Matter bill, because that's just the same old, and they're not changing anything. It's time to dismantle racism now.
Bill King, what's your take on both the local and the national level? I mean, is it just ridiculous to think about disbanding HPD?
Well, that's not going to happen. I promise you, put that on the ballot, it'll go down 80-20, 85-15, something like that. This is mostly a local issue. There's a few national issues, but policing is uniquely a local issue. I was happy to see Larry Payne be the head of Mayor Turner's task force. Larry's a good guy, very thoughtful. I'm afraid, though, as Charles suggests, like all these commissions, they end up producing a report. It goes on a shelf someplace and gets a bunch of dust on it. Nothing really happens. But there are some very specific systemic reforms we need to make. We need to have some kind of outside review of these cases. I think we need to go back to 2 police officers in a car. I think one person out there by themselves puts them in jeopardy, and it makes them more likely to overreact. We need to treat addiction differently than we treat it. We need to treat mental health differently than we treat it. There's a lot of important reforms that we need to do. I'm just skeptical that anything's going to happen.
Final 30 seconds goes to Michele Maples.
All right, when they say defund the police, they mean defund the police. Listen to their words. They're not trying to do something a little, some subterfuge here. They mean get rid of the police, and that's unreasonable. My second point, real quick, Tim Scott came forth with this justice bill. Y'all hate it? It's not good. Guess what? He gave the Democrats an opportunity to present 20 amendments. They walked out on him. This is not about police reform. This is not about helping systematic racism. This is all politics, and everybody should see through it.
Okay, we're going to leave it there. Still ahead, early voting begins this week in the Democratic battle to face Senator John Cornyn in the fall. We talk one-on-one with both contenders, so don't go away. Welcome back. Newsflash. A Fox News poll has Joe Biden beating Donald Trump in Texas. Whether the 1-point margin holds or not, that's not good news, Senator John Cornyn, who will face a significant challenge from either Air Force hero MJ Hegar or longtime state senator Royce West. The two Democrats face off in a July 14th runoff with early voting underway June 29th. West, a former prosecutor, has served in the Texas Senate for more than a quarter century and has championed key legislation that put cameras first on the dashboards of police vehicles and then on the bodies of Texas officers. West tells Fox 26 he is simply the right leader from the Lone Star State for this critical moment in history.
You've always been very pragmatic. Do you sense something different about this moment in time?
I do. I really do. I think everything is lining up. We have two pandemics, obviously COVID-19 and then this pandemic as it relates to social justice caused by the numerous shootings that we've seen over the last few months. And people are sick and tired of being sick and tired.
You also said recently, and I thought it was a cogent comment, that Republicans in the state of Texas, particularly in the leadership, have followed Donald Trump off the cliff. What do you mean by that?
Everything that Donald Trump, every time he says something, you as well as I know that he's spewing misrepresentations, and that's putting him out. He's lying. And for some strange reason, when he really exaggerates, we don't hear anything from John Cornyn. John Cornyn follows him lock, step, and barrel.
Your opponent in this runoff has no experience in terms of governing. Does that make a difference?
Well, it should make a difference, but the question is whether it will make a difference to voters. When you do head-to-head and we talk about experience, we talk about Texans endorsing me, it makes a difference. When it talks about being a true Democrat, being involved in the Democratic Party, it begins to make a difference. And so to the extent that we can get that message out and do a comparison and contrast, it will make a difference with people in the state of Texas.
As Democrats are looking at what they may perceive as two very, very qualified candidates or good candidates with different qualifications, why should they, in this moment in time, choose Royce West?
You know, because Royce West is ready. I've demonstrated the experience in taking on tough issues in a Senate that's been dominated by Republicans, but getting results. I've built the coalitions that are necessary between African Americans, Hispanics, Anglos, young, old. The moment in history, my friends, it reverberates loudly in terms of us not continuing to be victims of history, but being able to make history. What would Texas look like nominating and electing its first African American since Reconstruction to be the United States Senate? If Texas wants to lead, let's lead the nation in terms of electing someone that can make a difference for all Texans. That's Royce West.
Up next, the other contender in the Democratic race for U.S. Senate. Our conversation with MJ Hegar, wife, mother, and bona fide American war hero. Stay with us. Watch your point. We'll be right back. Welcome back. For those who don't know, our nation doesn't award the Distinguished Flying Cross as a trinket or party favor. It is awarded to a rare few who display extraordinary courage and skill under enemy fire. It was bestowed to MJ Hegar for her combat service in Afghanistan, service to country she hopes to continue in the United States Senate.
At a fundamental level, you wouldn't be running if you didn't believe you could do better than John Cornyn, and he needs to go. And what is at the core of that conviction?
I think the core of that conviction is my experience when I went to DC as a private citizen to try to fight for something that was going to make our country stronger. I found in John Cornyn a lack of representation, a lack of care that I was a constituent because I wasn't a major donor. And that's not unique to John Cornyn. It's a system not working for regular Texans and ignoring our pleas for calls for racial justice, for calls for a healthcare system that would have prevented a lot of the problems that we're seeing now with COVID. I mean, really a lot of the things that we've been fighting for are really magnified right now in this moment in our country. And people like John Cornyn are listening to their corporate donors more than they are their constituents. That's really the bottom line.
How would you deliver and reimagine policing in Texas and the country?
We need to understand that we're going to require legislative change, but it's going to require culture change as well. And we need to support the proposals and reforms that are being talked about, like banning chokeholds and ensuring that we end for-profit policing and some of the other things that contribute to this system. But we have to go beyond that. We have so much work to do to address the systemic racism in our economy, in housing, in employment, in access to small business capital, healthcare disparities, education. We can enact this meaningful change if we run good, viable campaigns. We get people who are standing in the way of reform out of office, like John Cornyn, and we raise up voices. That's why I'm excited to partner with Senator West afterwards.
Are you that person that moms and teachers can trust based upon your life experience and the fact that you have not been in public office and bring a fresh perspective?
Yes, I believe I'm that person because I have the experience and the skill set that is sorely missing from the cesspool of bootlicking and ego and people just looking out for their own self-interest in DC. We need to elect servant leaders, but we also need to start sending people to DC who are not going to burn down the system, who are not going to disrupt the apple cart, but who are going to challenge the system and demand more from it and demand that it start working for us.
Still ahead, he's enjoying a double-digit lead in the polls as the presumptive Democratic nominee. But who will Joe Biden pick as his running mate? And will it actually matter? That discussion still ahead when Watch Your Point returns. Welcome back. 5 months and change from the presidential election, and you'll be hard-pressed to find a poll that doesn't have former Vice President Joe Biden holding a substantial lead. 2016 taught us those numbers can be deceptive and literally change on a dime, all of which adds importance to Mr. Biden's selection of a running mate. A choice we are told that's coming sooner rather than later. Panel, we know it will be a woman, but which and why? I ask Carmen Roe.
So I think Kamala Harris is really the only person that I see as like the real front runner here. And I think everybody agrees with that. So I think she's the most likely. I think all we know for sure is that he needs a good one, that he's promised it will be a woman, and that we should know in early August.
Okay, Michele Maples, I hear that Elizabeth Warren's still in the running, even though she is not a woman of color.
Well, the Democratic Party is hounding him to choose a woman of color. So if we're talking about dreams, my dream is to see Beyonce as vice president. However, the reality is, I think Susan Rice would be a smart pick for him, except she was in a room where things were talked about with General Flynn that could become problematic, but that doesn't hit the news.
Charles Blain, is Michelle Obama actually in the game? I mean, talk about a headline busting situation.
I think that would be a great bet for him, but I don't think she wants it. I think, like Carmen said, I think Kamala Harris is in the running. I think Rep. Val Demings, who is an officer in Florida and has a great background in criminal justice, is in the running. And I think even there's I can't think of her name, Karen Bass, Representative Karen Bass, who represents like South LA apparently, is in the running. So I don't know. We'll see. It's interesting to watch it all fall out.
Okay, look, Tony, African-American voters pulled Biden's campaign from the very brink of disaster in South Carolina. He owes them. Do you think it should be an African-American female?
Definitely needs to be a woman of color. Some of the leading African-American women, someone mentioned Kamala Harris's name earlier. I think the only drawback for that is that he's got California. Biden will win California. And additionally, I don't know if Kamala will bring over Bernie voters. If we're gonna have a strong black voice, it might be Stacey Abrams. Her name hasn't come up as much. The mayor of Atlanta, and we need Georgia to be in play. If it is gonna be a Latina, Michelle Lujan Grisham, she's actually a very strong candidate, and Biden needs to get more Latino vote as well. So I think you've got a lot of great picks. It should be a woman of color, but I think it should come from a battleground state. That's my 2 cents. Either way, I really love the lineup, and we're gonna beat Trump.
Close us out, Bill, 30 seconds.
Historically, the polling shows that the vice presidential candidate doesn't make much of a difference. Most people are going to decide on the top of the ticket. I just don't think it's that big a deal one way or the other who he picks.
Okay. Up next, despite this alarming surge of COVID-19 infections, the nation's highest court says no to expanded mail-in balloting for Texans. We're going to talk about it after the break. Despite the alarming number of infections and new hospitalizations, the U.S. Supreme Court has rejected Democratic pleas to expand eligibility for voters seeking to vote by mail in the Lone Star State. Panel, could this decision significantly impact turnout in the coming runoffs and potentially the November general election? Tony Diaz.
Definitely. And this really concerns me because we should be making it very easy for everyone to vote. And this is really old fashioned. We should be talking about email voting. We should be talking about voting online. Everyone who runs should have an online website so the youth people get involved. So this is really a setback. Of course, now it means everybody's vote counts. And I'd point out that Judge Sotomayor, she said, okay, fine, don't do mail-ins, but she wants this to come back to look at a profound measure of this 26th Amendment argument. She didn't agree with the arguments, and she didn't like that it was being rushed. And I think that's the real issue. Let's help everyone vote. Stop voter suppression.
Charles Blain, what's your point?
Well, I guess Tony is in favor of voter suppression because if we move to email voting, a lot of folks in inner cities who don't have broadband access or internet or email aren't going to be able to vote. So I guess we just, we're just going to forget them. No, I don't think this is a way to suppress the vote. And I do think that, sure, it might diminish turnout a bit because people might be a little concerned, but the polling locations can take precautions. They can enforce social distancing. We can expand the number of polling locations. We can expand the number of polls in polling locations so that we can spread people out. There are a lot of precautions that we can take to ensure that voting is safe. And so I think if people want to vote, they should vote. They should just take the precautions, wear a mask, stay socially distanced, and do what they have to do.
Bill King, call it like you see it. Is Republican opposition to mail-in ballots really about suppression?
Well, I think both sides are always trying to calculate what the result of this stuff is. I personally don't have a problem with mail-in ballots. We've done them for over 65 and for people that have been out of the state for years. We know how to do it, and I'm perfectly okay with it being expanded. But here's the problem. Texas state law currently does not allow that. And so you can't just say we're going to ignore state election law and go do what we want to do, even just because we don't like it. And by the way, the really interesting aspect of this, I think everybody's missing, if we had a bunch of close elections, you would end up with a ton of election contest because the people that lose those elections would be saying those votes were cast illegally under state law. So if they go forward with this and we have some close elections, expect a bunch of election contests.
Jump in, Michele Maples.
Well, so the Supreme Court said, look, we're not getting involved in this, and they kicked it back down to the Fifth Circuit. And so the Fifth Circuit will now discuss and take into account the legal merits of voting by mail. Now, what's interesting is there was a study that was published by the Washington Post that said that the problem with mail-in voting is that the votes don't get counted. And the votes most likely to not get counted are those of young minorities because a signature does not match up, because there's something wrong with the envelope, because they missed the deadline. And so the most likely of those votes not to be counted are that of young minorities, which kind of goes in the face of this whole suppression argument. So like Charles said, get yourself to a voting location, put on a mask, use your hand sanitizer, and use social distancing.
Okay, we got to leave it right there. That's all the time we have for this morning. The conversation continues on a national level with Chris Wallace on Fox News Sunday. From all of us here at What's Your Point, have a safe and healthy week.